right, pal. Get ready for the day, buddy.
Hey, Dad.
Welcome to Your Need to Know.
Hey, Dad.
I'm your host, Catherine
Do
Reed.
we have a gun?
And joining
What's
me
up?
today is
We
Leilani
have a gun.
Tizon, who is a suicide prevention advocate. Thank you so much for being here, Leilani.
Thank you for having me.
So as we launch into Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, which is September, it's important to really have a frank conversation with our viewers about what all of us can do to bring awareness to what is truly an epidemic in this country, especially among young people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know you've experienced this firsthand, which is how you became an advocate.
Yes. So back in 2008, I lost my brother. He was 18 at the time, and he was about 3 months from high school graduation, and I was 11. And so he took his own life on March 2nd, and it was kind of an eye-opener for my family. You don't really, you don't expect for these things to happen. It just kind of pops up in your life one day, and you don't really have the answers you need, and you never really get the answers you need. And, my family and I have been playing the what if game for a really long time, and it's been about 10 years now. And so we just had his 10-year anniversary. His birthday's approaching in October, and all the holidays kind of fall in after that, and it's really hard. But when we lost him, my dad was deployed overseas, so it was my stepmom and myself that kind of had to go through this for a little bit. And he came home like shortly after my brother had taken his life, and we kind of sat as a family, and there was a lot of support around us. There was a lot of neighbors that were providing food for us, a lot of family that were coming from all different locations. We lived in Charlotte at the time, and it was really hard just because I was kind of known as that kid. We lived in Harrisburg, and it was a very small place. You couldn't go into a grocery store without running into your teacher, kind of deal. And so when I went through 6th grade, it was really hard. I was in and out of school just because I couldn't handle being around people. I wanted to be around my family all the time. And then once I went to 7th and 8th grade, sometimes teachers would approach me and be like, "Oh, you're the kid that lost her brother." Or I would have kids I had never even talked to before be like, "Oh, my sibling knew your brother. I understand how you feel." And that was really hard because obviously no one knew how I was feeling at the time. And so when we moved to DC to kind of get out of that atmosphere, I had started this new school, and my intention was to kind of lay low for 4 years, was kind of study, get out, go to college, and kind of continue that way. But God had other plans for me. And so as freshmen, we have to sit through a Signs of Suicide class. And I attended Forest Park High School at the time in Woodbridge. And when I went through this class, it was laughable. A lot of the acting in the video was really bad. The people that were kind of teaching it were kind of just reading off script. And you could definitely tell it was like, if you had a question, they would kind of look through the answers. And that's not how it's really supposed to be. And it was really hurtful because I had initially sat in this class to be like, I'm gonna learn more. It's been a couple years, and I need to know the right steps to get through high school and the rest of my life to, what are the signs of depression? What are the signs? What if I reach somewhere stressful? What if I'm not okay? What do I do? But it was hard with all these, kids in the room laughing and not paying attention. And so afterwards, I'd asked my teacher at the time if I could go, speak to people that put it together. And so I did. And I said, "Listen, I'm not trying to run your class, but I just want to answer your questions at the end. No offense to you, but I think people would react better if they had a question and someone that had went through it would be able to answer that." And they were very hesitant. I was 14 at the time. They're like, "What do we have to learn from a 14-year-old? You know nothing." And my guidance counselor at the time was like, "Listen, I've talked to her family, and I think this would be good. Just give her one shot." And they're like, "Okay, fine. We'll give it to you." So they did. And it kind of blindsided me a little bit. I was just, there to answer questions. But once the class had ended, they were like, "Okay, Leilani's going to explain her story and then answer questions." And I was like, "Oh, I've never done this before, so I guess I'll kind of explain it." So I did, and I went through this rundown. And it was scary for me because as a freshman, these other freshmen I was speaking to, I knew I was going to graduate with these people, and I was just pouring my heart out onto the stage. And eventually there were questions and things that I could answer that was coming from my perspective instead of an adult's perspective that had never went through it before. And so I did that for 4 years, and my junior year came around, and I was very fortunate to do an interview, a TV interview with WUSA 9, and they were really helpful through all of it. And they asked me to come back and do a live interview, and then I was asked to do a questionnaire on like a live web chat, and so people could come in and out of the chat and ask me questions, and so they could do it anonymously, and so they could feel comfortable asking me, and I would sit there and I would answer them. It was a really great experience, but there was kind of a downfall to it. A lot of my kids in my school didn't like I was getting a lot of attention. I was student of the quarter that year. I was I was president, and then I was on this interview, and so a lot of kids reacted really badly, asking me things like, who made you the poster child for this? Who asked you to do all this? Where were you when I needed you? And would submit these questions anonymously to me, or even just on Twitter would ask all these awful things. And so, they say, oh, you're getting cyberbullied, just delete everything. And so I did. My family suggested that I do, kind of step back from it and just go to school and, kind of just lay low. And I did, but it followed me into school, and people were like, did you see she deleted her Twitter? Could you believe how cowardly she is? And
high school is a crappy experience in general.
It is.
Just
it really
in general.
Was. And I even, when I had to pass down my presidency to somebody else, I had showed up, congratulated him, and was leaving. And when I left early, people were like, can you believe that she's such a sour sport? Like, I can't believe her. And I was just trying to do everything very quietly, but no matter what I did, it didn't please anybody. And that was a really hard time for me, because then I kind of also took a step back from public speaking. I was like, I don't want to help myself, but I don't want to help people anymore either, if this is how people are going to continue to react to me. And with a lot of love and support from my family and my parents and, friends, it was kind of like, you don't need those kind of people in your life. You have us, and that's all you need. And I was like, you know what, you're right. And so I continued to do the public speaking throughout the rest of my high school days, and all through my 4 years of college.
And so now that you're out, you're still actively involved. And I think it's important for, to your point, people who had experience with suicide be there for other people. And young people tend to care more about authenticity and the genuineness of where the information is coming from, as opposed to just the factual information from people who are like, I'm going to tell you about the signs that you should. Most families don't even talk about mental illness, depression, suicide, addiction. I mean, all of those things are in my family. So when I sat down with my children to say, our family does have a history of mental illness and suicide and alcoholism, and these are things that you need to be aware of. Because, and you and I have talked previously about this, there's a difference from being sad and being depressed. And knowing when it's time to ask for help, knowing how to ask for help, and knowing who to ask for help.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I kind of, I've also had kids, I guess, people my age come up and ask me things like that. And, they're very serious, because in high school, everyone's just look at me, look at me, look at me. And so I would have people come up and say, how do I know she's lying to me? Do I know this person is actually depressed, or are they just sad and looking for attention? And it kind of came down to, at the time I didn't really know how to answer that question, because my first instinct is, no matter, even if they are playing around looking for attention, my first instinct is to give them attention, because what if it is something serious? And this attention seeking is them looking for help. And so, I kind of explained it that way, but if it kind of turns into, even if it turns into, the little boy who cried wolf, I always drop everything I'm doing to, pay attention to that person, because you just never know. You just never know how many times they played, the boy who cried wolf with somebody else. And what if I was their last resort? And so I kind of looked at it that, the difference between really sad is, you kind of go through a breakup for your first time. And obviously for people that go through a breakup for the first time, it's very devastating for them. And I kind of look at it like, if it lasts more than 2 weeks and you really are starting to have suicidal thoughts or something, like thinking about hurting yourself, it's time. Even if you are not, by the DSM book, depressed, I think it's important to find an adult that you can trust, or even like a friend that you can trust, that you can talk to and say, hey, listen, I just went through this event. I'm having a really, really hard time. Do you think we could sit down and just talk for a little bit?
I think when you say that you and your family played the game of what if.
Yes.
I think everybody who has had suicide in their life always asks, what could you have done differently, said differently? Why didn't you notice? I have asked myself these same questions, like, how could I not have known? Like, how could there must have been something I could have done differently. And it's a terrible game to play. Also, because a lot of times there's not any indication prior to a suicide that someone's going to do that. There really is not like a checklist, a symptomatic, thing that you can look at. So it makes it even more difficult to address suicide prevention.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've sat through all the classes that kind of like, this is what it looks like if someone's going to commit suicide. And a lot of it looks like they're giving their stuff away, or they're posting things on their social media, and this, that, and the other. And 9 times out of 10, it really isn't like that. You're right. And it's because they have tunnel vision, which is kind of where they stop looking for help, because they think that the situation they're in is so unrepairable that the only way out is if they take their own lives. And, we did play the what if game for a really long time. And I mean, we hate to say it, but we still are to this day. But the only thing we can really do is reach out to each other and, love on one another. And we don't really talk about it in my family anymore unless, a holiday comes up, or, we really need to sit down and talk about it, and then we'll talk about it. But it's not something that's reoccurring in our lives every day. But when it came to the what if game, and I did play this for a really long time, my parents kind of sat down and were like, listen, there's nothing we can do now. And this isn't our fault. It's not his fault. It's just kind of something that he had a mental illness and he wasn't well.
And there's been a lot of blame laid. Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain recently committed suicide, and a lot of criticism was laid upon them because they both had children. Charges of they were selfish, they were unthinking, how could they do this to their child? But one of the best descriptions that I have heard about suicide is that it's not that people want to end their life, they want to end the pain. They want to end the psychic pain, and this is how they see doing that. And I think it's kind of unfortunate that outsiders tend to heap criticism without us understanding, because we can never truly understand what has gone through the mind of someone who's actually chosen to end their life.
Right, you're totally right. And the people that have, attempted, like, people jumping off bridges that have lived, and when they come back around and they say things exactly like that, halfway through my fall, I realized that this is what I wanted. I just wanted that event to end because I was going through so much pain. And so we kind of have an insight of what's going through their minds at the time. But I mean, I think about my brother often, and I'm like, maybe halfway through it, he was like, this isn't what I wanted. But we can't ever make that assumption because, once they're gone, we don't know. But when we have people that do live through it, it's really nice to know that, halfway through it, they were like, I wanted this to stop. And I prayed that I would live, and I did. And I thank God every day for it. And, I'm willing to go to, get help for it, or seek, things that make me happy, and, to make sure I never end up in that situation again.
And when we come back from this break, we're going to talk further about suicide prevention.
Listen, you're my friend.
I noticed you haven't really been yourself recently.
Yeah, I feel like something's up.
How are you?
Are you okay?
Is there anything you want to talk about?
I just want to know how you're feeling.
And listen, even if you don't know what to say, I'm here to talk.
No matter what you're going through,
I just want you to know I'm here.
I've got your back. When you want to talk, I'm here.
I surrender. All right, pal. Get ready for the day, buddy.
Hey, Dad. Hey, Dad. Do we have a gun?
What's that?
Do we have a gun?
Welcome back to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me today is Leilani Tizon, who is a suicide prevention advocate. So Leilani, when we went to our break, we were talking about the fact that, First of all, this is an epidemic, and it's hard to work on prevention when it's hard to understand what goes on in the minds of people who have attempted suicide or who've actually committed suicide. But the numbers are staggering. Among white men, we've seen a jump in white men over the age of 50 who are committing suicide. We have veterans who are committing suicide every day. But really the most perplexing statistic is among those aged 10 to 24, where suicide is the second leading cause of death. You know, your brother was in that age range. And so this leads us to ask, what can we be doing differently? I know that you read the article about the 9-year-old who committed suicide this week in Denver. You know, what are the answers? His grandmother was saying that it takes a village and the village is broken.
It does, and you know, I pray for that family every day, because to lose someone that young is just, it's heartbreaking. And I've seen a lot of comments toward it, and it really makes me angry to see events like this happen, and people are like, well, how did he even do it? Like, how is it possible that 9-year-old knows how to take their own life? Like, it's not hard to, you know, it's happening all around us. And like you said, it's happening every day to veterans. And I know this 9-year-old is, you know, it's just, it's, you know, it's breathtaking. It's not okay. And there aren't really any answers except to, you know, be open and to listen to our kids. It's, you need to understand that, you know, he came out as, you know, as gay, and all he needed was for people to support him. And it's awful to know that these kids at school bullied him and made fun of him. And we got to raise our kids to be more open to people that aren't like us. And it breaks my heart to, you know, I have a lot of friends that, you know, are like still hiding from their parents because they're scared of what's going to happen. And it shouldn't be like that. Just because someone's different doesn't mean that, you know, they're any different from the insides of us. You know, they're just as human as we are. They talk just like we do. They, you know, act like we do. And just because they have a different interest doesn't make them any less of a person.
So the LGBTQ community has a higher incidence of suicide than a lot of other groups of people within that 10 to 24-year-old age group. I think maybe a lot of people were surprised that a 9-year-old would even self-identify as gay. But this is the time that we're living in, that it's okay to be gay. He has been born and raised in his first 9 years in a society that's more embracing of the fact that there's room for all of us, including gay people. So coming out probably didn't seem like a very momentous decision to him. It probably just was more like, I'm sharing who I am with my classmates and my friends. And so the other thing I think we have to look at too is that not everybody who's bullied commits suicide either. And so this is the other thing we grapple with, is that, you know, is every child who's bullied really at a higher risk for suicide? Maybe yes. But what can we do for the individual, or try to help individuals that we think might be at greater risk?
Well, first of all, I think that kids need to just stop bullying altogether. Like, it really doesn't make any sense to me. So like when I was bullied in high school, and then I was actually bullied very briefly in college. And it was kind of like, I didn't understand what their mindset was. Was I really any different from what they were doing? Was I only different because I wasn't an athlete and I was on TV? Was it really that bad that I was on TV getting this publicity and trying to help other people out there, that kids felt the need to retaliate and be like, you don't need to do this, you don't need to be on TV? Like, why can't there be a support system behind that? And we just need to be there. Like, when I was bullied, I definitely didn't think about taking my life, but I did think about just stepping out of that school for a while, or taking a year off, or doing something. But when you have a family support that understands what it looks like to have lost someone to suicide, my family was very, very supportive. And it's hard when families don't go through that, because I know we are also in a generation where people my age are telling their parents, you know, Mom and Dad, I need help, I'm depressed. And a lot of them are coming back and their parents are saying things like, well, no, you're just really sad, this is just a phase, or that doesn't exist in our family. And it's kind of like, I think it comes a lot from denial. And I think parents are scared because they're saying things like, you know, when you tell a kid they're not really going through this, it's kind of like, what do you mean they're not really going through this? It's very rare that kids are even coming to their parents at all and saying how depressed they are. And so when they do come out, and I'm looking for parents to just say, you're right, what can I do to help? But instead it's going the other way around, and they're getting angry. And I think it's a little bit of confusion in them, because I've spoken to parents and I've tried talking to parents and being like, your kid has come to me and has said that they need help. I was wondering if we could maybe sit down and talk about the next steps on getting him a guidance counselor in school, or even, there's free counseling in very many places. And so instead of having to pay for therapy, which I know can be expensive, why don't we just take the steps of, let's start with a guidance counselor at school. And parents will come back and get mad at me. You don't know my kid. This doesn't exist in our family. And it's hard because it's when kids come to me and are self-hurting, self-harm.
Yeah, there's a lot of kids who cut and then their parents never know it.
Yes, but then when they do come out to their parents, the parents get angry. And I can understand it's angry because they are getting protective, but they're also not understanding because where they grew up, I assume, a lot of depression and a lot of mental illness, there was a lot of stigma behind it. And so when it finally comes up into this generation, and we're growing up in this generation where people are very open, like this 9-year-old who just wanted friends and family to be supportive of who he was, but instead it backfired on him. We just got to learn to be a supportive community. And I think that's what we're really lacking here, not in just, this area, but everywhere.
So let's throw some things out here on the table. We've talked about bullying and the role that bullying plays. Mm-hmm. What about so much emphasis on achievement? Mm-hmm. And the third thing that people are talking about a lot more is the contagion aspect of suicide. Mm-hmm. That when you have one suicide, it's more likely that you're going to have, sort of like school shootings, the contagion of behavior. Mm-hmm. So, are we focused in the 10 to 24-year-old age group too much on achievement? Is that putting undue pressure on young people? And when there is a suicide, is it more likely that there'll be another one because of the contagion of behavior?
So to answer your first part, I do think there's a lot of stress that's put on between that age group. I know I'm very fortunate. I went to a college that believed in mental illness days, and if the school as a whole didn't, there were professors that did. And so our school policy was you couldn't miss any class, but it was dependent on the professor on what they wanted to put on their syllabus. And I had a lot of professors say, you get 6 days you can miss, and you can use them as mental illness days all you want, because I know that college is stressful, and I know this is a stressful time, especially for seniors. And those were great. Those are great to have, not just because, there are kids probably that skipped and used those days, and that's fine, but there's also kids that really needed those because you never know what someone's backstory is. There's a lot of pressure for people to become doctors, a lot of people that need to be lawyers.
It's very high pressure. And something, even adults, just regular people need to take a mental health day. Mm-hmm. But we don't even call them mental health days because there's a stigma around that, saying mm-hmm. that you need a break. You're overstressed, you're not coping. Mm-hmm. So mental health days, I think, should become part of our lexicon. We should talk about people taking a mental health day.
I definitely think so. I completely agree with that. I mean, I know that even sometimes my parents come home and are really, really stressed, and they just need, the weekend's not enough, because on the weekend we, run errands, we go grocery shopping, we clean, and then they go back to work. Like, they need one day, everyone needs one day where they do absolutely nothing except lay and have a day to themselves. This generation is all about self-care and, doing face masks and bath bombs and what have you, but we need to always kind of continuously, encourage that. But, going to your second part, saying, is this kind of like a contagion thing? I've kind of looked into that, and they say that that's kind of the snowball effect is a myth. And I agree and disagree with that because, I was scared for a while that since my brother committed suicide, was that going to happen to me? And as an 11-year-old, those are the things I was thinking of. Not the what if questions, but more of, now I'm really sad, what's going to happen to me? Or if my parents are really sad, what's going to happen to them? Or what are his friends thinking now? And I think once it happens once, more people know how to react to the situation. And so now there's more support behind it. And my parents were very attentive to my needs. They're very attentive now to my emotions. And they're very much, I still know there's fear in their hearts that I will end up like my brother one day, but I am always reassuring them that's never going to happen, because I've watched how it's affected my family, and I never, ever want to put them through that again.
Let's talk a little bit about the fact that September has been set aside as Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. Mm-hmm. There are walks that are happening all over the United States, including there's one in Fairfax City on September the 29th at the Amphitheater at City Hall. Mm-hmm. And you're going to be attending the one in D.C. that's at the Lincoln Memorial on October 20th. Yes. What do you think these walks help to do? Who shows up to these walks, And what is the goal?
So I've been attending these walks for about 10 years now. My family actually helped start the chapter in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the people that show up to these walks are people that have lost someone to suicide, or people that are supporting others that have lost people to suicide. But it's not just about suicide. It's also people that are going through depression and have recognized it in themselves or other people. And it's a whole different community. And it's actually, it's weird when I say this, but it's beautiful, because in this world of where depression and suicide, there's so much stigma. You know, they come out with the hashtags like #end the stigma, and that's what they're doing. They want people to come out to these and say, you're not alone. And I very much, from personal experience, when I lost my brother, I was like, there is no one in this world that understands what I'm going through. But when we started attending these walks, people wear these colorful beads.
I love your stories about the beads.
Yes, and I will get more into that, but it's just, if I wear an orange bead for my brother, and I also wear a green one saying that I have struggled with depression, and I have before, I am currently going through it. And I also wear a blue one saying I support the cause. And I think the one for like children is white, and there's one for veterans, and there's one for the LGBTQ community. And it makes you feel less alone, because you can show up and without verbally even talking to these people, you can look across the field, you can look across the room, you can look across even while you guys are walking, and just look around people's necks. And once you memorize what beads, or even you don't have to memorize the beads, just know what you're wearing compared to someone else. I mean, there's been a time or two I have locked eyes with someone that was also wearing orange beads, and we looked at each other and we smiled and we nodded. And it was kind of a very silent, like, I'm sorry that you lost a sibling, but I also know how you feel. And it's emotional. It's emotional, and it's also really empowering at the same time.
And that's sort of this community connection, back to the fact that it does take a village, and that we all need to help be responsible for the mental health of our communities.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so people can find you at the Lincoln Memorial on October 20th.
Yep.
It starts at 3 o'clock. People can come to the walk here in Fairfax City on September 29th at the Amphitheater, and that starts at 11 a.m., I believe. Yep. And you're available. I know you do a lot of speaking, so I hope that people will reach out to you if they would like for you to come and talk to their organization about suicide prevention, because I do think you come from a place where you've had a very personal experience. So I want to thank you for being here, Leilani. This has been very illuminating, and this is what you need to know.